Let's connect with Dr. C. Rangarajan, Chairman with Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. Mr. Rangarajan, good morning. Thank you for joining us. Always a delight to have you back on ET Now. Mr. Rangarajan, first, your comments on RBI's GDP assumptions for FY13. RBI's assumption for FY13 is 7.3%. The GDP for the quarter gone by was 6.1%. Do you think Indian economy in FY13 could really report such a strong uptick?
I think so. Our own estimate was that the Indian economy in the current fiscal will grow at 7.5%. Therefore, 7.3% and 7.5% already close to each other. Therefore, I believe the estimate made by the Reserve Bank is very much feasible and possible. I see several reasons why things should be better this year as compared to last year. Inflation will be lower this year as compared to last year. And I also believe that some of the important infrastructure areas such as power, coal and roads will do better this year as compared to last year. Therefore, I have the feeling that the current year we should see the economy picking up a little better than last year.
Dr. Rangarajan, good morning. The RBI has cut the repo rate by 50 bips and has clearly stated that it may not cut repo rates even further. What are the policy measures and reforms that we can expect from the government now to propel the GDP growth and take it up to the slated 7.3% like they've indicated?
The budget has already been presented and it has set out certain directions in which the economy can move. I think one of the most important contributions that the budget can make towards enhancing growth is by containing the fiscal deficit. It has been assured that the fiscal deficit in the current fiscal will be maintained at 5.1% of the GDP. This will be a sharp decline from the previous year. Further, as I mentioned in the answer to the previous question, the government will move ahead and perhaps ensure that the targets set for capacity creation and output in the key infrastructure sectors like coal, power, roads and railways will be achieved during this year. This itself, in my view, acts as a stimulant for private investment and private output. Therefore, there is every reason to believe that the economy can grow at a faster rate during the current fiscal.
Mr. Rangarajan, at a time when the global economic growth is still anemic, global commodity prices are still high, do you think Reserve Bank of India has front-loaded their rate cut and they've taken a big gamble? Well, the possibility before the Reserve Bank of India was to go in two steps, perhaps. Reduce it by 25 basis points initially and then further cut it by another 25 basis points. All that the Reserve Bank has done now is in the light of the fact that the decline in industrial production is far more than what it was originally expected. Perhaps it may be best to do it at one go. But as the Reserve Bank of India has clearly indicated in its guidelines, further reductions will depend upon how inflation behaves in the coming weeks and coming months. The maneuverability or the scope for the Reserve Bank of India will be conditioned by what happens to inflation.
And just stretching that point, Dr. Rangarajan, about inflation, that is expected to remain sticky and the fiscal consolidation is as well very important at this juncture. There are talks of hike in fuel prices for the last 2 months and it still hasn't come. When will the fuel price hike take place and what would be the quantum of the same, if at all you have any indication?
Well, the level of subsidies indicated, particularly for the petroleum sector in the budget, essentially implies that policy actions will be taken during the year in order to adjust the prices. This is almost evident from the numbers. And the finance minister has said on many occasions that he would ensure that the subsidies would be maintained at the budgeted level. The timing of when this will happen, when the prices will be adjusted in relation to the petroleum sector will depend upon a variety of factors, but it is my view that one should expect that to happen as early as possible.
But sir, budget was tabled on 16th of March and it's been over a month. What is stopping the government from increasing oil prices, because crude prices globally are refusing to come down?
Well, anyway, this is a political decision, and as the budget has been presented and the parliament is in session, there would be further discussion on the budget, and therefore perhaps they will wait for the full budget discussions to be over before taking any decision.
Mr. Rangarajan, you've been on the hot seat before in your earlier avatar as Reserve Bank of India Governor. So if you were the current Reserve Bank of India Governor, would you have done a 50 basis cut or a 25 basis cut?
Well, it depends upon the situation. As I mentioned earlier, one could have done it in 2 steps of 25 basis points, but they have done it in one go. But I think the decision to cut the repo rate by 50 basis points must also be seen in the context of what they have said about the future. They have said the maneuverability for further reductions is very small, and therefore it's a question of the option is between doing it in 2 steps and 1 step.
So Dr. Rangarajan, just to stretch that point forward, is that all we're going to see this entire financial year, just a 50 whips cut?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. Can you repeat it?
I was talking about the repo cut that you were just talking about. The RBI governor as well pretty much indicated that the headroom for further rate cuts is pretty narrow. What is your own estimate of what we may see by way of monetary easing? Is the 50 bips cut that we saw yesterday it for the entire financial year, or do you think we can see some more easing kicking in the next few quarters?
I think some more easing will happen only when there are very definite signs of decline in the price index. As I mentioned earlier in answer to one of your questions, that at some particular point adjustment in petroleum prices and some other administered prices may become necessary. While that is important and beneficial in the long run, in the short run it will also push up the prices. Therefore, if prices tend to decline sharply during the course of the year, then perhaps that will be the time at which there can be further easing. Until then, perhaps we'll have to be satisfied with the cut of 50 basis points.
The Reserve Bank of India, Dr. Rangarajan, also alluded to a concern that they expect that the government borrowing for this fiscal could overshoot like it did for FY12. Do you think that is a big risk?
Well, that is contingent upon what happens to the fiscal deficit. But as I said, there is an imperative need to contain the fiscal deficit at the budgeted level. And I think the finance minister has been repeating this very often. Therefore, all efforts must be made to keep the budget deficit, the fiscal deficit at the budgeted level. And if that is so, then the borrowing program will not go beyond what has been indicated in the budget. Last year, the borrowing program went way beyond what was indicated originally because the budget deficit was breached by a large margin. But that will not happen this year, and therefore I think the borrowing program will be limited to what has been indicated in the budget.
Right. Mr. Rangarajan, there has been some state level talk when it comes to implementation of GST. To your mind, when do you think GST will be implemented fully and operationally in India?
My guess, let me say, is that during the course of this year, the negotiations will be completed, and either they may come during the course of the year or at best by the beginning of the next fiscal. But the possibility of the GST being implemented during the course of the year cannot be ruled out.
Dr. Rangarajan, credibility of the IIP data this time around has been widely questioned as well as doubted. What is the response of the government to that, and by when do you think the industrial and investment cycle will see an uptick, if at all?
Now, as far as the data are concerned, yes, it is very distressing to note that one wrong reporting had resulted in a big change in the overall growth rate of index of the industrial production. The government have already appointed a committee to look into the manner in which the index of industrial production is being computed. I would suggest to the committee that they should look at not only the methodology for constructing the index of industrial production, but also the procedures adopted and the manner in which the data are collected. The methodology and the sampling techniques may be all right, but if the procedure and the machinery for collecting data and information are imperfect, then the index suffers. Therefore, the committee must look at both aspects of the problem.
Do you see that by end of next year or beginning of next year, DTC will be implemented?
Well, I think that is the intention. I think by the beginning of next fiscal, we should be ready for the implementation of the DTC. Some parts of the DTC have already been incorporated in the current year's budget, but the full implementation of the DTC can happen by the beginning of the next fiscal.
Do you think diesel prices will never be deregulated in India? I know you have strong views on that, but let's look at the ground reality.
I think it can be deregulated. After all, when the petrol prices were deregulated recently, it was also indicated that action on diesel will also be taken. Therefore, there is even now an in-principle acceptance of the deregulation of the diesel prices. It's all a question of when. But I do see action being taken during this year.
As chairman of Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, are you in favor of implementation of GAR? Because the Vodafone episode already has got government a lot of bad PR, and I'm sure this will have an impact on future FDI. Well,
GAR was actually intended to achieve the opposite objective. The purpose of these rules were aimed at ensuring clarity as far as taxation was concerned. Unfortunately, it has been interpreted wrongly, and it has created a certain wrong sentiment. But I would say that there is a need for clarity relating to several provisions, and GAR as such is not a bad thing. I would suggest to the government that before introducing the appropriate rules, a detailed consultation must be made with industry, and therefore the advisory council that they are thinking of setting up in relation to the GAR should comprise of representatives of the leading industrial organizations in our country, so that the rules are examined thoroughly from the angle of the industrial entrepreneurs before being introduced.